I still remember the day my mother locked me out during the snowstorm. I was 13, shivering in my school clothes as she watched through the window with a smile that never reached her eyes. The temperature had plummeted to 15 degrees, and my thin jacket did nothing against the biting wind. I knocked until my knuckles were raw, begging to be let in. Her response still echoes in my nightmares. "Fresh air builds character," she sneered, before pulling the curtains shut. I stayed silent that night. That was 9 years ago. Yesterday, the nurses found her huddled by a drafty window in her care facility, whispering for another blanket. Some might call it karma. I call it justice served cold. The porch incident wasn't a random act of cruelty. It was merely the culmination of years of escalating psychological warfare waged by the woman who was supposed to protect me. My mother, Nancy, raised me alone after my father left when I was 4. I have few memories of him, just a vague recollection of a tall man with a kind laugh who disappeared one morning and never came back. His absence left a void in our home that Nancy filled with resentment and alcohol. In the early years, she tried. There were moments of normalcy when she'd help with homework or make my favorite mac and cheese, but those moments grew increasingly rare as I got older. Her drinking intensified, and so did her unpredictability. Some days she'd ignore me completely. Others she'd scrutinize everything I did, finding fault in the smallest actions. "Jonas, why are your shoes so muddy? Jonas, that shirt makes you look like your father. Jonas, can't you see I have a headache? Be quiet." I became an expert at reading her moods, analyzing the subtle differences between her sighs, the way she set down her glass, or how she entered a room. I learned which version of Nancy I'd encounter based on these tiny signals. School became my sanctuary. I threw myself into academics, earning straight A's and joining every club that would keep me out of the house until dinner. Teachers praised my dedication, never realizing it was survival rather than ambition driving me. I hoped that maybe, just maybe, if I made her proud enough, she'd stop looking at me like I was the reason her life had fallen apart. The day of the porch incident was supposed to be special. I had won a prestigious academic award, a district-wide competition that came with a small scholarship for future college expenses. The ceremony was scheduled for 4 in the afternoon, and Nancy had promised to attend. She even bought a new dress for the occasion, hanging it on her bedroom door as a reminder. "I wouldn't miss it, Jonas," she had said the night before, during one of her rare sober evenings. "This is exactly the kind of thing your father said you'd never accomplish." When morning came, she was already drinking. Still, I remained hopeful as I headed to school, my acceptance speech tucked carefully in my pocket. But as 4 o'clock approached, Nancy was nowhere to be seen. I scanned the audience repeatedly, as names were called. When mine echoed through the auditorium, I walked across the stage alone, accepting my award with a practiced smile that hid my disappointment. I called home repeatedly afterward, but she didn't answer. By the time I arrived at our house, it was nearly 7, and snow had started falling heavily. Nancy was on the couch, several empty wine bottles on the coffee table. "Where were you?" I asked, still clutching my award certificate. She looked up, her eyes unfocused. "Where was I supposed to be?" "My ceremony. You promised." Something shifted in her expression then, a hardening I recognized as dangerous. "Don't take that tone with me. You sound just like him." "You promised," I repeated, hurt overwhelming my caution. She stood up unsteadily. "Oh, I'm sorry the world doesn't revolve around your little school thing. Some of us have real problems, Jonas. Real adult problems you couldn't begin to understand." It wasn't little. It was important to me. That's when she grabbed my arm, pulling me toward the front door. "You know what your problem is? You're soft, entitled. Your father coddled you, and now you think everyone should drop everything for you." Before I could process what was happening, she had pushed me onto the front porch and locked the door behind me. My backpack was still inside. My coat was still inside. The snow was falling faster now, the temperature dropping, with the setting Sunday. "Mom, let me in." I pounded on the door. She opened the curtains and watched me, that terrible smile on her face as I shivered in my school clothes. When I begged her to let me back in, she sneered those words I'll never forget. "Fresh air builds character." I stayed on that porch for 6 hours, as darkness fell, and the temperature plummeted to 15 degrees. I tried the neighbors, but the closest ones weren't home. Eventually, I huddled in the corner of the porch, using an old newspaper to block the wind, my body shaking uncontrollably. It was Mrs. Rivera from 3 houses down who found me around 1 in the morning when she returned from her late shift. She was horrified at my condition and rushed me into her warm car. My fingers were blue, and I couldn't stop shaking. She called an ambulance when she realized how cold I was to the touch. The hospital diagnosed mild hypothermia. When they contacted Nancy, she claimed I had run away after an argument and must have returned while she was asleep, choosing to stay outside to make her feel guilty. The doctors didn't believe her. Neither did social services when they were called in. For the first time, my mother's carefully constructed facade crumbled under official scrutiny. I was temporarily removed from her care and placed in foster care while an investigation took place. As the ambulance took me away that night, I looked back to see Nancy watching from our doorway. There was no remorse in her eyes, only anger at being exposed. That was the moment I realized a terrible truth. My mother didn't love me, and perhaps she never had. The Wilsons were nice enough, as foster parents go. They had a modest 4-bedroom house in a neighborhood not far from mine, where they took in kids on a temporary basis. Tom and Linda Wilson had been fostering for 15 years and had seen just about everything the system could throw at them. "You're one of the easy ones," Tom told me during my first week there. "No drugs, no violence. Just a rough situation." Their biological son, Trent, was 16, 3 years older than me. He had his father's easygoing manner and his mother's intelligence. He treated me like a younger brother almost immediately, showing me his video game collection and offering me the good controller without me having to ask. "My mom says your mom is a real piece of work," Trent said one afternoon while we were playing Madden. "She has issues," I replied, not knowing how else to describe Nancy to someone who had grown up with normal parents. "Yeah, well, issues or not, you don't leave your kid to freeze to death." The Wilsons had family dinners every night, where everyone talked about their day. The first few times I just listened, stunned by the casual normalcy of it all. When Linda asked me questions, I gave short answers, waiting for the hidden agenda, the trap that must be lurking beneath her friendly tone. It took weeks before I stopped flinching when Tom reached across the table for the salt. "It's okay to relax here, Jonas," Linda told me one evening when she found me washing dishes without being asked. "You don't have to earn your place." My social worker, Miss Daniels, visited weekly. She had kind eyes and a no-nonsense attitude that I appreciated. She didn't sugarcoat things. "Your mother is attending mandatory parenting classes and alcoholism treatment," she informed me during one visit. "She's petitioning for reunification." "Do I have to go back?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Miss Daniels gave me a look I couldn't quite decipher. "The goal is always reunification when possible, Jonas. But we need to make sure it's safe first." 3 months later, Nancy had completed her programs with flying colors. Her house passed inspection. Her alcohol tests came back negative. She had joined a church group and found a better job. On paper, she was Mother of the Year. "She's putting on a show," I told Miss Daniels during our final meeting at the Wilsons. "You don't know her like I do. We'll have regular check-ins," she assured me. "And you have my direct number. Any problems, any at all, you call me immediately." The day I returned home, Nancy had prepared my favorite meal and cleaned the entire house. She hugged me at the door while Miss Daniels watched, telling me how much she had missed me, how much she had changed. I stood stiffly in her embrace, not returning it. As soon as Miss Daniels drove away, Nancy's smile faded like a light being switched off. "Well, that was quite a performance you put on for the authorities," she said, her voice low and controlled, making me look like some kind of monster. "I didn't make you do anything," I replied, suddenly aware of how alone we were. 3 months of my life wasted jumping through hoops because you couldn't handle one cold night. Parenting classes, therapy, pissing in cups to prove I'm sober. She laughed bitterly. "You have no idea what you've put me through, Jonas." That night, I discovered that Nancy had learned something valuable during her mandated classes: how to punish without leaving evidence. The heat in my bedroom mysteriously stopped working. My portions at dinner grew smaller. The Wi-Fi password changed daily, and I only received it after completing an expanding list of chores. Friends stopped coming over after Nancy told their parents I was going through a difficult phase and needed space. She never hit me. She never locked me outside again. But she found 1,000 tiny ways to make me understand that I had betrayed her by seeking help, and that I would pay for it until I left her house. I began keeping a journal, documenting every incident in detail, every cutting remark, every accidental inconvenience she engineered. I hid it beneath a loose floorboard in my closet, along with a small emergency stash of food and money. Sometimes, when things were particularly bad, I would read the entries from my time with the Wilsons, reminding myself that somewhere, normal families existed. That knowledge became both my comfort and my torment. The social worker visits grew less frequent. Nancy played her role perfectly each time, and I stayed silent. What was the point? I had 3 more years until graduation, until freedom. I could survive anything for 3 more years. But surviving and living are different things. I learned to exist as a ghost in my own home, invisible except when Nancy needed someone to blame for her frustrations. I perfected the art of emotional detachment, watching my own life as if it were happening to someone else. In many ways, the boy who sat shivering on that porch had frozen inside, preserving himself until conditions improved. The one bright spot was my continued friendship with Trent Wilson. We exchanged phone numbers before I left, and he made a point of checking in regularly. His parents even invited me over for dinner once a month, which Nancy reluctantly allowed to maintain her supportive mother image with social services. "You can always come back, you know," Trent told me during one of these visits. "Mom and Dad would take you in again in a heartbeat." "It's complicated," I replied, knowing that without new evidence of abuse, the system would just send me back to Nancy. But thanks. I didn't tell him or anyone else about what was really happening at home, partly out of pride, partly out of fear that any intervention would only make things worse. Instead, I focused on survival, on getting through each day, each month, each year until I could escape on my own terms. Looking back, I realize now that Nancy's greatest victory wasn't the control she exerted over my daily life. It was convincing me that I deserved no better, that this silent war between us was normal, and that no one would believe me anyway. It would take years and an accidental discovery to shatter that carefully constructed lie. High school should have been a fresh start, but walking into Madison High that first day felt like entering another prison, just with different guards. I had spent the summer preparing, studying the school layout online, researching clubs and activities that would keep me out of the house as much as possible. I had my schedule memorized before I even received it officially. The school library became my sanctuary. Miss Goodwin, the librarian, took a liking to me and gave me a pass to use the space during lunch periods. "Some people need the noise of the cafeteria," she said. "Others need the quiet to recharge." I had no intention of making friends. Friends asked questions. Friends wanted to come over. Friends complicated the delicate balance I had established at home. But Trent had different ideas. Now a senior when I was a freshman, he made a point of introducing me to people, including me in conversations, pulling me into his social circle despite my resistance. "You need people, Jonas," he insisted, "even if you think you don't." Then there was Mr. Parker, my English teacher. He noticed my writing in the first essay assignment of the year, a personal narrative about a place that matters to you. I wrote about the public library downtown, where I'd spent countless hours escaping both the physical and emotional cold of my home. While other students turned in the expected 2 pages, my essay ran to 7, detailed and passionate. He asked me to stay after class. "You have a gift," he told me, tapping my paper. "This isn't just good technical writing. You made me feel what that place means to you." I shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "I just wrote what I know." "That's exactly the point. Most students your age write what they think I want to hear. You wrote something real." He leaned forward. "We have a creative writing club that meets Tuesdays and Thursdays. I think you'd fit right in." I joined reluctantly, but soon found myself looking forward to those meetings. Mr. Parker created a space where honesty was valued above perfection, where vulnerability wasn't weakness but strength. I wrote fiction, creating characters who faced their own versions of hell and found ways to overcome them. I never wrote directly about Nancy, but pieces of her appeared in the monsters and villains my protagonists faced. "Your antagonists are so authentic," Mr. Parker commented once. "You understand something many writers twice your age don't. Real evil isn't dramatic. It's mundane, insidious, wrapped in ordinary packaging." If he suspected my writing came from personal experience, he never said so directly. Instead, he gave me books, novels where characters faced adversity and emerged stronger, memoirs of survival and resilience. Each one felt like a message. You are not alone. Others have walked this path. There is a way through. At home, things had settled into a cold war. Nancy maintained her sobriety, at least officially, though I sometimes found bottles hidden in unusual places, behind the washing machine, under the gardening supplies in the garage. Her abuse had become refined, almost elegant in its precision. She knew exactly how to wound without leaving marks, how to gaslight so effectively that sometimes even I questioned my memories. I never said that, Jonas. Why do you always twist my words? That jacket looks cheap. Is that really what kids are wearing now? The Petersons' son got into Princeton early decision. I guess we can't all have ambitious children. Each comment designed to undermine, to destabilize, to remind me of my place in her world. I documented everything in my journal, a habit that had become almost compulsive. Sometimes I wasn't even sure why I kept the record anymore. Who would ever read it? What purpose would it serve? But still, I wrote, preserving the truth as a defense against her constant revision of reality. The summer before my junior year, I turned 17. Nancy had been called for jury duty, which annoyed her endlessly. She'd been selected for a tax fraud case that was expected to last at least 2 weeks. They expect me to listen to boring financial testimony for $10 a day, she complained. And now I have to organize all these tax documents for my own audit next month. The timing is ridiculous. The IRS had flagged her returns for the past 3 years for review. Nothing serious, she assured me, just a random selection. Still, she was anxious about it, spending hours sorting through financial records in the dining room. Make yourself useful, she snapped one evening, pointing to a stack of folders. Sort these by year, then by category within each year. Medical expenses, charitable donations, business expenses. I sat across from her, methodically organizing papers. The task was mind-numbing but preferable to the alternative. Another evening of her subtle jabs and criticisms. We worked in silence for nearly an hour before I came across a folder labeled Jonas, Special Needs Funding. I frowned, opening it automatically before Nancy could notice. Inside were documents I'd never seen before. Medical evaluations diagnosing me with conditions I didn't have. Severe ADHD, processing disorders, emotional disturbance. There were forms showing monthly disability payments made to Nancy for my care going back years. Special education accommodations I'd never received. Receipts for therapies that had never happened. My heart pounded as I quickly closed the folder, sliding it into the appropriate year pile without comment. Nancy was engrossed in her own paperwork and hadn't noticed my momentary stillness, the slight tremor in my hands. That night, after she went to bed, I snuck back downstairs and found the folder again, along with others like it from different years. I took photos of everything with my phone, hands shaking with rage and disbelief. All this time, she had been profiting from fraudulent claims about me, collecting thousands of dollars annually meant for my treatment and support. It explained so much. Her panic when social services got involved. Why she never took me for regular doctor appointments, always claiming I was seen by specialists when needed. These specialists existed only on paper, their signatures forged or paid for. I wanted to confront her immediately, to throw the evidence in her face and watch her try to explain it away. But something stopped me. A cold, calculating voice that had grown stronger over years of survival. Confronting Nancy would only give her time to hide the evidence, to create a new narrative where I was confused or lying. No, this information was power. For the first time, I held concrete proof of her deception, something that couldn't be explained away as misunderstanding or adolescent exaggeration. This was fraud, punishable by law. The realization settled over me not with the heat of righteous anger, but with the cool clarity of opportunity. I returned the documents exactly as I'd found them, but the knowledge changed everything. While Nancy saw a compliant son counting the days until graduation, I was mentally cataloging her crimes, considering options, planning a reckoning she would never see coming. The frozen boy on the porch had finally found the key to unlock his future, and possibly her downfall. Senior year arrived with the promise of freedom tantalizing on the horizon. Every college application I completed felt like another step away from Nancy's orbit. I focused on schools at least 500 miles away, preferably more. Distance wasn't just a preference, it was a necessity. Mr. Parker helped me craft essays that showcased my writing abilities, without revealing too much of my personal circumstances. Colleges love resilient stories, he advised, but you don't need to give them the unfiltered truth. Focus on how you've grown through challenges, not the challenges themselves. I applied for every scholarship available, knowing Nancy would contribute nothing. My grades and writing opened doors, securing me substantial financial aid at several universities. Each acceptance letter I received felt like oxygen, like possibility. University of Washington is giving you that much? Nancy said when I showed her my best offer. There was calculation behind her surprised expression. Well, Seattle is expensive. That money won't go as far as you think. I nodded noncommittally, having learned long ago not to engage with her negativity. What I didn't tell her was that I had already accepted, had already sent in my deposit from money I'd saved working at the local bookstore. In less than 4 months, I would be 3,000 miles away from her. My planning extended beyond just escape. Since discovering Nancy's fraud, I had been meticulously gathering evidence, making copies of documents when she was out, photographing mail from government agencies, recording conversations where she inadvertently referenced my non-existent conditions or treatments. I stored everything in encrypted files, backed up in multiple locations. The question that kept me awake wasn't whether to expose her, but when and how. Doing it before I left for college risked derailing my plans if I became entangled in an investigation. Waiting meant she would continue benefiting from her scheme. I needed advice, but had no one I could fully confide in. Finally, I approached Mr. Parker with a hypothetical scenario, carefully disguised as a plot for a short story. My protagonist discovers his guardian has been committing fraud, I explained during one of our writing club sessions. He has evidence, but isn't sure what to do with it. Mr. Parker considered this thoughtfully. That's an interesting ethical dilemma. What does your protagonist want? Revenge? Justice? Or simply to move on with his life? All of the above, I admitted. But mostly he wants to make sure his guardian can't hurt anyone else. In fiction, as in life, timing is everything, Mr. Parker said. Your character might consider securing his own position first, then acting from a place of strength rather than vulnerability. It wasn't direct advice, but it confirmed my instincts. I would wait until I was established in Seattle, beyond Nancy's immediate reach, before making any moves. But life rarely accommodates careful plans. 2 weeks after graduation, Nancy called me into the living room for what she termed an important discussion about your future. She sat primly on the couch, a glass of what she claimed was iced tea beside her. I recognized the faint smell of vodka beneath the lemon. I've been thinking, she began. With you leaving in August, this house is simply too large for just me. The upkeep, the property taxes, it doesn't make financial sense. I nodded, waiting for her point. So I've decided to sell. The real estate market is excellent right now, and my agent thinks we can get top dollar. When? I asked, already calculating how this might affect my plans. The house goes on the market next week. If all goes well, we'll close before you leave for school. Something in her tone triggered my suspicions. Where will you go? She smiled, a genuine expression of satisfaction that was more concerning than her usual cold smirks. I've always wanted to live somewhere warmer. I'm thinking Florida. I found a lovely condo in a retirement community outside Tampa. Retirement community? You're only 51. They've recently lowered their age requirements, and the amenities are wonderful. Pool, golf course, social events. She waved her hand dismissively. The point is, I'll be using the equity from this house for the purchase. It's time for me to think about my future. The implications hit me with stunning clarity. She was liquidating her major asset, our home, and relocating to Florida with the proceeds. There would be no home for me to return to during breaks, no base of operations for my plans. More importantly, she would be establishing herself in a new state, potentially complicating any legal action I might eventually take. What about my things? I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. The furniture? The stuff in my room? You can take what fits in your dorm room. The rest we'll need to sell or donate. The condo is fully furnished, and shipping costs are prohibitive. In that moment, I saw Nancy clearly for perhaps the first time. This wasn't just about downsizing or relocating. This was her final act of separation, her way of severing any remaining obligation to me. She wasn't just moving on. She was erasing me from her life, while keeping the profits from my existence. That night, I revised my plans. Waiting was no longer an option. I needed to act before she disappeared to Florida with the house money, before my evidence became obsolete or inaccessible. Over the next week, while Nancy met with realtors and began packing, I executed a three-part strategy. First, I mailed copies of key documents to a new P.O. box I had opened in my name, ensuring I would have access to the evidence regardless of what happened to our house or my belongings. Second, I set up mail forwarding for specific types of documents: government communications, medical notifications, anything that might contain further evidence of her fraud, to that same P.O. box, effective immediately. Finally, and most importantly, I installed monitoring software on her laptop during one of her real estate appointments. Nancy was surprisingly careless with her computer security, using the same password for everything. My birthday, ironically enough. The software would give me remote access to her emails, documents, and browser history, allowing me to track her activities even from Seattle. The house sold quickly, as Nancy had predicted. A young family offered above asking price, captivated by the good school district and spacious backyard where their children could play. The irony wasn't lost on me. The night before the closing, Nancy celebrated with an open bottle of champagne, not bothering to disguise her drinking anymore. To new beginnings, she toasted herself in the kitchen, not bothering to include me. I packed the last of my possessions into 4 suitcases: clothes, books, my laptop, and a few mementos that mattered only to me. Among them was my journal, now filling 6 notebooks spanning years of documented abuse and manipulation. As I closed the final suitcase, I felt a strange sense of completion. This house had never been a home, not really. It had been a battlefield, a prison, a place of slow emotional suffocation. Leaving it behind should have felt like liberation. Instead, I felt a cold, steady resolve settling in my chest. Nancy thought she was escaping, starting fresh without the burden of parenthood. She didn't realize that some bonds can't be severed by distance or legal maneuvers. The ties between us had been twisted by her actions into something unnatural but unbreakable. She had taught me patience during those long hours on the freezing porch. She had taught me calculation through years of navigating her moods. She had taught me self-reliance by providing nothing I could depend on. Now I would show her exactly how well I had learned those lessons. The revenge I had planned would not come as a sudden storm, but as a slow change in climate, imperceptible at first, then impossible to ignore, and ultimately, inescapable. As Nancy slept off her champagne celebration, I slipped a small envelope into the folder containing her closing documents. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 7 words: "I know everything. This isn't over yet." She would find it eventually, perhaps days or weeks later. By then, I would be established in Seattle, beyond her immediate reach but very much present in ways she couldn't yet imagine. The thought brought me the first genuine smile I had experienced in that house for years. Seattle greeted me with rain and possibility. University of Washington's campus sprawled majestically along the shores of Lake Washington, green and vibrant even under gray skies. My dorm room was small, but entirely mine. The first space I had ever inhabited that wasn't controlled by Nancy. I arranged my few possessions carefully, placing my journals in a lockbox under my bed, a habit of secrecy I couldn't yet break. My roommate, Dean, was a computer science major from Portland, with an easygoing personality and a passion for hiking. He respected my privacy, but included me in social events, gradually drawing me out of my self-imposed isolation. Through him, I met other freshmen navigating their own transitions to independence, though none seemed to be carrying the particular weight I was. "Your mom hasn't called once since we got here," Dean remarked a month into the semester. "Mine calls like 3 times a week to make sure I'm eating vegetables." I shrugged, unsure how to explain that Nancy's silence was a blessing, not a concern. "We're not close." For the first time in my life, I was just Jonas, not the kid with the alcoholic mother, not the boy who had been locked out in the cold, not the fraud victim. My professors knew me for my writing and critical thinking. My classmates knew me for my dry humor and willingness to help with essays. No one looked at me with pity or concern. The anonymity was intoxicating. But at night, when the dorm quieted, I still logged into the monitoring software I'd installed on Nancy's computer. I watched as she settled into her Florida condo, joined social clubs at her retirement community, and continued to collect disability payments for a son who no longer lived with her. She had simply changed her address with the relevant agencies, maintaining the fiction of my non-existent conditions and her dedicated care. During my Psychology 101 class, I met Allison. She sat next to me on the first day, her curly brown hair pulled back, a coffee stain on her notebook. When the professor asked us to pair up for an exercise on cognitive biases, she turned to me with a smile that reached her eyes. "Partners?" she asked, extending her hand. "I'm Allison Carter." "Jonas," I replied, taking her hand briefly. "Jonas Taylor." We discovered a shared love of true crime podcasts and classic sci-fi films. She was majoring in psychology with plans for graduate work in clinical therapy. Unlike most people, when Allison asked questions, she actually listened to the answers, her head tilted slightly, eyes focused and attentive. Our study sessions evolved into coffee dates, then dinner dates, then late-night conversations about everything and nothing. I found myself telling her carefully edited versions of my childhood, testing the waters of vulnerability. "My mother and I had a difficult relationship," I explained during one of these conversations. "She struggled with alcoholism after my father left." Allison didn't offer platitudes or pity. "That must have shaped a lot of your experiences growing up. Do you still talk to her?" "No. She moved to Florida after I graduated. We're better with distance between us." As our relationship deepened, so did my internal conflict about Nancy. Part of me wanted to let go of the past, to focus on building a life with Allison and pursuing my education. Another part remained vigilant, monitoring Nancy's activities, gathering evidence, waiting for the right moment to act. These two impulses felt increasingly incompatible. In my sophomore year, I changed my major from English to business, with a focus on financial analysis. Mr. Parker had helped me discover my voice as a writer, but understanding money, how it moved, how it could be tracked, how systems could be manipulated, felt like a more practical tool for my particular situation. Allison noticed the change but didn't press when I explained I wanted more career security. "Just don't lose your writing," she said. "You're too good to stop completely." I promised her I wouldn't, and kept a journal separate from my Nancy documentation, filling it with observations, fictional sketches, and increasingly, reflections on my relationship with Allison. She had become the center of my new life, the person who made me believe I could be more than the product of my upbringing. Then, during winter break of junior year, everything changed. I was checking the monitoring software, which I did less frequently now, maybe once a week instead of daily, when I noticed something alarming. Nancy had received an email from the Social Security Administration requesting verification of my continued disability status, including current medical documentation. For the first time in years, her fraud was being questioned. She responded with panic, contacting several doctors, whose names I recognized from her forged documents. None responded. She then began researching how to legally establish guardianship of an adult child with disabilities. Me. Potentially to maintain control of the benefits even though I was now 20 years old. 2 days later, my phone rang with a Florida number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail. "Jonas, it's your mother." Nancy's voice was artificially warm, the tone she used for social workers and teachers. "It's been too long since we've spoken. I need to discuss some important family matters with you. Call me back as soon as possible." I didn't return the call. She tried again the next day, and the day after that her messages growing increasingly urgent. Finally, she sent a text. "The Social Security office is asking questions about your condition. I need you to speak with them and confirm what I've told them. It's very important, Jonas. Call me." The audacity was breathtaking. After years of silence, she expected me to become complicit in her fraud, to lie to federal authorities to protect her scheme. Something cold and decisive crystallized in my chest. I called her back. "Jonas, thank goodness," she answered immediately. "Did you get my messages? This is urgent." "I got them," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "What exactly is happening?" She launched into an explanation about routine verification, bureaucratic details, nothing to worry about. All I needed to do was confirm that yes, I still had the conditions documented in my file, and yes, she had been providing appropriate care and support throughout my childhood, and continued to do so by sending me money at college. "You haven't sent me a penny," I said when she finished, "and we both know I don't have any of those conditions." A brief silence. "Jonas, don't be difficult. This is just paperwork. If they stop these payments, It affects both of us. I've been saving that money for your future. Another lie. The monitoring software had given me access to her banking records. The disability payments went straight to her personal expenses and the mortgage on her Florida condo. I'm not comfortable lying to federal investigators, I said carefully. Her tone changed instantly, the maternal warmth vanishing like smoke. After everything I've done for you, I raised you alone. I put a roof over your head. I made sure you had everything you needed. You locked me outside in a snowstorm and watched me shiver, I replied, surprised at how steady my voice remained. You collected government benefits for conditions I don't have. You used that money for yourself while I worked part-time jobs to pay for basic necessities. That's not how it happened, and you know it. You always had such a flair for dramatics, Jonas. This is exactly why I've had to manage your care so carefully. The gaslighting was so familiar, it almost made me laugh. Almost. I won't lie for you, I said. And if they contact me directly, I'll tell them the truth. You wouldn't dare. Her voice had dropped to a dangerous whisper. If you say anything, I'll make sure your precious new friends know exactly what kind of troubled person they've invited into their lives. I'll tell your girlfriend about all the problems you've had, the way you've manipulated people with your stories. The threat struck deeper than she could know. Allison had become my anchor, my future. The thought of Nancy poisoning that relationship with her twisted versions of reality sent a surge of protective rage through me. Do what you think you need to do, I said before ending the call. That night, I made a decision that would permanently alter both our lives. I gathered all the evidence I had collected over the years. The fraudulent medical documents, the financial records showing her misappropriation of government funds, my detailed journals documenting her abuse, and anonymously sent copies to the Social Security Administration's Fraud Investigation Division. I included a timeline, contact information for witnesses like the Wilsons and Mrs. Rivera, and details about Nancy's attempts to involve me in her deception. I was careful to present only verifiable facts, letting the evidence speak for itself rather than coloring it with emotion. Within weeks, I received a call from an investigator named Graham Marshall. He asked careful questions about my childhood, my medical history, and Nancy's care. I answered truthfully, providing additional documentation when requested. This is one of the most comprehensive cases I've seen, Marshall commented toward the end of our conversation. Most people don't document things this thoroughly. I learned early that my word alone wouldn't be enough, I explained. As the investigation progressed, I finally told Allison the full truth about my childhood and Nancy's fraud. We sat on a bench, overlooking Lake Washington, the spring sun warming our faces as I revealed every detail I had kept hidden. I was afraid to tell you, I admitted when I finished. I thought you might see me differently. She took my hand, her eyes serious. What I see is someone who survived something terrible and refused to be broken by it. That's the Jonas I know. Her acceptance was like oxygen after years of holding my breath. For the first time, I felt the possibility that Nancy's shadow might not always darken my future, that I could step fully into the light of my own making. The investigation concluded 3 months later. Nancy was charged with multiple counts of fraud, facing potential prison time and substantial financial penalties. When the case became public, she called me again, her voice no longer threatening but desperate. Please, Jonas, tell them it was a misunderstanding. Tell them you do have special needs. I can't go to jail. I can't lose everything. You should have thought of that before you used me as your meal ticket, I replied, feeling a strange mixture of satisfaction and emptiness. Goodbye, Nancy. I didn't attend her trial. I didn't need to see her face when the judge announced her sentence. The conviction itself was enough. Official acknowledgement that I had been telling the truth, that her careful facade had finally crumbled completely. As I closed my laptop on the news article detailing her sentencing, Allison wrapped her arms around me from behind. How do you feel? I considered the question carefully. Like this chapter is ending, but the story isn't quite finished yet. I couldn't have known then how prophetic those words would be, or how the final chapters would unfold in ways neither Nancy nor I could have anticipated. After graduation, Allison and I moved in together, renting a small apartment near the hospital where she had been accepted for her clinical psychology internship. I had secured a position at a financial consulting firm, specializing in fraud detection and prevention, an irony not lost on me. Life developed a pleasant rhythm of shared meals, weekend hikes in the mountains surrounding Seattle, and building a circle of close friends who knew nothing of my complicated past. Nancy remained a distant figure, serving her reduced sentence of 18 months after pleading guilty to lesser charges. Due to claimed health issues, some potentially legitimate, others suspiciously timed, she had avoided the maximum penalties. The court had ordered restitution, but her assets had mysteriously diminished during the investigation, leaving little to recover. I tracked her situation through public records and occasional updates from the victim services coordinator assigned to her case. I learned that she had lost her Florida condo, her retirement community membership, and most of her social connections once her crimes became public. The knowledge brought neither satisfaction nor guilt, just a dull recognition of consequences naturally following actions. What I didn't share with Allison or anyone else was that I had taken my revenge a step further in ways that would only gradually become apparent. When our family home had been sold, I had used some of my scholarship money and savings from part-time jobs to create a shell company. Through this entity, I anonymously purchased the mortgage on Nancy's foreclosed Florida condo when the bank put it up for auction. On paper, she was making payments to Wintershield Properties LLC, a name chosen deliberately for its subtle reference to that snowy night on the porch. In reality, she was unknowingly sending monthly checks to me. I had become her landlord, with the power to determine her housing security. I never raised her rent or threatened eviction, but the knowledge that I controlled this fundamental aspect of her life provided a symmetry that felt like justice. As my career advanced, I expanded this control in small, nearly invisible ways. When Nancy needed a new job after her release, I anonymously funded a position at a local community center that would hire people with criminal records. When she required surgery for a legitimate health issue, I arranged for an anonymous donation to cover costs her insurance wouldn't. I became the unseen architect of her second chance, not out of compassion, but because true revenge required her to live and face her diminished circumstances. 4 years after graduation, Allison and I married in a small ceremony overlooking Puget Sound. As we exchanged vows promising to create a family based on trust and mutual support, I felt the last pieces of my frozen childhood self finally thawing. Nancy wasn't invited, wasn't even informed. In my new life, she had become a footnote rather than a defining chapter. That same year, I received notification that Nancy's health was deteriorating more rapidly than expected. The prison doctor had identified early signs of vascular dementia, likely accelerated by years of alcohol abuse. She was still functional, but would require increasing levels of care as the condition progressed. "What are you going to do?" Allison asked when I shared the news. By this point, she knew everything about my ongoing surveillance and subtle manipulation of Nancy's circumstances. "Nothing immediately," I replied. "Let's see how it develops." Over the next 2 years, reports of Nancy's declining condition became more frequent. She struggled to maintain employment, forgot to pay bills, and had difficulty managing basic household tasks. The community supervisor monitoring her post-release conditions recommended placement in an assisted living facility. But Nancy had neither the resources nor the family support to arrange this. The decision I faced wasn't simple. I could walk away completely, allowing the state to place her wherever there was an available bed, likely a underfunded facility with minimal care. Or I could intervene, using my now substantial financial resources to control the final chapter of our story. After discussing it with Allison, now pregnant with our first child, I chose the latter option, not out of forgiveness or obligation, but because it offered something Nancy had never provided me: choice. Through Wintershield Properties, I arranged for Nancy's placement at Lakeview Care Center, a mid-tier facility with adequate medical care, but none of the luxury amenities found in premium retirement homes. I selected it specifically for its location, a converted hotel with architectural quirks that created perpetual draft issues in certain rooms. Nancy was assigned to one such room, where the windows never quite sealed properly, allowing a constant, subtle chill that no amount of maintenance seemed to fix. I established myself as her financial trustee, a role that gave me oversight of her care without requiring direct contact. The staff knew me only as Mr. Taylor from Wintershield, who managed Miss Parker's finances and made decisions about her care plan. They reported to me monthly, unaware of our true relationship. These reports revealed a pattern that brought a certain poetic justice. Nancy, whose memory was increasingly unreliable, complained consistently about one thing: the cold. She requested extra blankets, space heaters, denied for safety reasons, and room transfers. The facility made accommodations where possible, but the structural issues remained, leaving her perpetually chilled in a way that medical tests couldn't quantify and additional clothing couldn't quite resolve. In a lucid moment during a care planning meeting with staff, Nancy reportedly said, "It's like the cold gets into your bones. No one believes how bad it is." The statement, recorded in clinical notes and forwarded to me as her trustee, felt like the closing of a circle that had begun on that porch 22 years earlier. By this point, I was 31, a father to a 1-year-old son named Ethan, and a partner in my firm. My life with Allison had blossomed into everything I had once thought impossible. Stable, loving, full of small joys and shared dreams. We had purchased a house with a view of the mountains, where Ethan would grow up never knowing the kind of fear and uncertainty that had defined my own childhood. Yet despite all this, I found myself increasingly preoccupied with Nancy's situation. The monthly reports no longer brought satisfaction but raised uncomfortable questions about the person I had become. Was maintaining this subtle torment making me more like her than I cared to admit? Allison, now working as a clinical psychologist, specializing in trauma recovery, noticed my distraction. "You need to see her," she said one evening, as we sat on our deck watching the sunset. "Not for her sake, but for yours." "Why would I want to do that?" I asked, though part of me already knew the answer. "Because you're stuck in a relationship with her ghost," Allison replied gently. "You've created this elaborate system to punish her without ever having to face her. That's not closure, Jonas. That's just another form of control." Her words cut through my careful rationalizations. The revenge I had engineered wasn't just about justice for a wronged child. It had become a way to maintain the connection to Nancy that I claimed to want severed. By controlling her environment, I had kept her present in my life in ways I hadn't fully acknowledged. "What if seeing her makes it worse?" I asked, voicing my deepest fear. "What if I can't move past it?" Allison took my hand. "Then we'll deal with that together. But you won't know until you try." The next day, I contacted Lakeview Care Center to arrange a visit, not as the mysterious Mr. Taylor from Wintershield, but as Jonas Parker, Nancy's estranged son. The staff sounded surprised but pleased, noting that family connections often helped patients with dementia maintain cognitive function longer. As I hung up the phone, I felt a strange sense of inevitability. The confrontation I had been both seeking and avoiding for over a decade was finally at hand. Whatever happened next would determine whether I could truly leave the past behind or would remain forever tethered to that night on the porch, perpetually 13 years old, shivering in the cold of my mother's making. The Lakeview Care Center smelled of antiseptic and cafeteria food, a combination that immediately transported me back to the hospital where I had been treated for hypothermia all those years ago. A young nurse named Samantha greeted me at the reception desk, her expression brightening when I gave my name. "Mr. Parker, your mother will be so pleased. She rarely gets visitors." I nodded, not trusting myself to respond appropriately. The last time I had seen Nancy in person had been almost a decade ago, during a brief court appearance where she had barely acknowledged me. "Just to prepare you," Samantha continued as she led me down a pastel-colored hallway. "Your mother has good days and challenging days. Today has been moderate. She might repeat herself or become confused about timelines, but she still recognizes people from her past." We stopped outside room 216. "She's usually by the window this time of day. Would you like me to come in with you?" "No," I said, finding my voice. "I'd prefer to see her alone, thank you." Samantha smiled encouragingly and stepped away, leaving me facing a door with a small whiteboard that read Nancy Parker in cheerful blue marker, surrounded by drawn flowers. Taking a deep breath, I knocked and entered without waiting for a response. The room was institutional but personalized, with a few photographs and a quilt on the bed. Nancy sat in a wheelchair by the window, a blanket draped across her legs despite the warm spring day outside. At first glance, she seemed smaller than I remembered, diminished somehow. Her once sharp features had softened, and her hair had gone completely gray, cut in a simple style that required minimal maintenance. She turned at the sound of the door, her eyes narrowing as she tried to place me. Recognition dawned slowly, spreading across her face in a series of micro-expressions. Surprise, wariness, something almost like fear. "Jonas?" Her voice was raspy but recognizable. "Is that really you?" "It's me," I confirmed, remaining near the door, uncertain how to proceed. She studied me intently. "You look like your father now. taller than I remembered. I took a few steps into the room, noting the persistent draft from the window despite the day's warmth. "How are you, Nancy?" She flinched slightly at my use of her first name rather than Mom, but recovered quickly. "Cold. Always cold in here. No one believes me, but there's something wrong with this room." She pulled the blanket tighter around herself. "Why are you here after all this time? Did they finally tell you I was sick?" "I've known about your condition for a while," I admitted, taking a seat in the visitor's chair positioned several feet from her. I decided it was time we talked. Nancy's eyes narrowed again, suspicion replacing vulnerability. "You've known? How? Who's been telling you my business?" I considered lying, maintaining the facade of separation between Wintershield Properties and myself, but found I had no more appetite for deception. "I've been overseeing your care for the past 3 years. The trust paying for this facility is mine." She stared at me, processing this revelation with visible difficulty. "That's not possible. Wintershield handles my affairs. Some businessman named Taylor. Wintershield Properties LLC was established by me 8 years ago," I explained calmly. "I purchased your condo at foreclosure auction after your conviction. I've been your landlord, and now your care provider, for years." The color drained from Nancy's face as the implications registered. "You? All this time, it was you pulling strings behind the scenes? Why? To torture me? To watch me suffer? To ensure you experienced consequences appropriate to your actions," I replied, maintaining my composure. "You used me for financial gain throughout my childhood. You inflicted physical and psychological pain systematically over years. I simply created a symmetrical response." Nancy's laugh held no humor. "Symmetrical response. Listen to yourself, Jonas. So clinical, so detached. I may have been a terrible mother, but at least I was honest about my cruelty. You've been playing God with my life while pretending to be above it all." Her words hit with unexpected force, piercing the rational justifications I had built around my actions. There was truth in what she said, a truth Allison had tried more gently to help me see. My revenge, however justified it might have been initially, had evolved into something more insidious, a shadow version of Nancy's own controlling behavior. "Maybe you're right," I acknowledged after a moment. "That's part of why I'm here, to end it." Nancy turned back toward the window, silent for long enough that I wondered if she had forgotten I was there. When she finally spoke, her voice had lost its defensive edge. "Do you remember that blue bicycle you wanted for your 10th birthday? The one with the reflectors on the wheels?" The question caught me off guard. Vaguely. "You said it was too expensive." "I bought it," she said, still looking outside. "Had it hidden in Mrs. Rivera's garage for 2 weeks. The night before your birthday, I started drinking to celebrate. By morning I was so hungover I could barely function, much less pretend to be excited about your special day. You looked so disappointed when there was no big present, just that science book and new shoes. I had no memory of expecting anything more than what I'd received. By 10, I had learned to keep my hopes modest. The bicycle stayed in her garage until she moved away a year later," Nancy continued. "She asked what to do with it, and I told her to donate it. I couldn't bear to give it to you by then. It would have raised too many questions about why it hadn't been given when it should have." "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, unsettled by this glimpse into her thought process. Nancy turned back to face me. "Because I want you to understand that I knew, Jonas. I always knew I was failing you. Sometimes I tried to be better, but the trying never lasted. The alcohol, the bitterness, they always won." She gestured weakly around the room. "This place, the cold I can never escape, the staff who smile while ignoring my complaints. It's fitting. It's what I deserve. I recognized your handiwork even before you confirmed it today. Who else would understand so perfectly how to create discomfort that sounds like paranoia when described to others?" A nurse appeared in the doorway with a medication tray, interrupting the moment. "Time for your afternoon meds, Miss Parker." She nodded politely to me before approaching Nancy with several pills and a small cup of water. After the nurse left, Nancy seemed more alert, but also more agitated. "I think about that night, you know. The snow. How blue your lips were when they found you. Do you regret it?" I asked, the question I had waited nearly 2 decades to pose. Nancy considered this seriously. "Regret implies I would act differently, given another chance. I don't know if the person I was then was capable of better choices." I was so angry. At your father for leaving. At life for disappointing me. At you for needing things I couldn't give. She paused. But yes, I regret the person I became. I regret what that person did to you. It wasn't the straightforward apology part of me had hoped for, but it held more truth than I had expected. Nancy had never been one for convenient realizations or tidy emotional resolutions. I reached into my jacket and removed a small notebook, one of my childhood journals. I brought something to show you. Her hands trembled slightly as she took it, opening to pages filled with my adolescent handwriting detailing incidents of her abuse, my feelings, my desperate attempts to understand why my mother seemed to hate me. I kept records of everything, I explained as she turned pages slowly. Not just for the fraud case, for myself. To remind myself I wasn't crazy when you said things hadn't happened, or hadn't happened the way I remembered. Tears formed in Nancy's eyes, the first genuine emotion I had seen from her that wasn't anger or self-pity. I did this to you. Made you document your own childhood like a caseworker. She closed the journal, returning it with hands that shook more pronouncedly. No wonder you grew up to build entire systems of surveillance. I trained you well, didn't I? The parallel she drew made something shift inside me, a perspective I had been avoiding. My elaborate revenge hadn't just been about justice. It had been about becoming powerful in the way Nancy had been powerful, controlling someone's environment, their daily reality, their perception of security. I have a son now, I said, changing direction. Ethan. He's 1. Nancy looked up sharply. You're a father? I nodded, removing my phone to show her a picture of Ethan with Allison at the beach, his chubby hands holding a seashell, face alight with discovery. I'm married too. Her name is Allison. She's a psychologist. Of course she is, Nancy said with unexpected insight. You'd need someone who could understand the damage. I'm terrified of becoming you, I admitted, voicing the fear that had haunted me since Ethan's birth, of finding myself standing over his crib one day and feeling the same resentment you felt toward me. You won't, Nancy said with surprising certainty. How can you be so sure? Because you're here, she replied simply. Because you're facing what happened instead of burying it. Because you recognize the danger. She gestured at the journal. I never kept records of my mother's cruelty. I just repeated it, thinking somehow the roles being reversed would heal something in me. It never did. We sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of decades pressing around us. Finally, I stood, having reached a decision that had been forming since I entered the room. I'm going to make some changes to your care arrangement, I said. There's a room available on the east wing of this facility. It's warmer, gets better natural light, and the staff ratio is higher. Nancy looked up, confusion evident. Why would you do that? Because continuing to make you suffer doesn't undo what happened to me. It just keeps us both locked in the past. I moved toward the door. The transfer will happen tomorrow. The staff will help you pack. Jonas, she called as I reached for the handle. Will you come back? I turned to face her one final time. I don't know. But Allison thinks Ethan should know his grandmother. Once you're settled in the new room and if your condition stabilizes, hope flickered briefly across her face. I'd like that. To meet him, I mean. Even if just once. There would be conditions, I said firmly. Therapy for you. Supervised visits only. No overnight stays ever. And at the first sign of inappropriate behavior, it ends permanently. You're a good father already, Nancy observed quietly. Setting boundaries, protecting your child. Everything I failed to do. As I left Lakeview that afternoon, I felt lighter somehow, as if I had set down a burden I hadn't fully acknowledged carrying. The cold calculation that had driven my revenge plans seemed distant now, replaced by something more complicated but ultimately more healing. The recognition that Nancy's power over me had always been temporary, while my power over myself was permanent. I called Allison from the parking lot. It's done, I said when she answered. How do you feel? She asked, just as she had years ago when Nancy was convicted. Like I'm finally ready to be warm again, I replied. In the weeks that followed, I dismantled the more punitive aspects of Nancy's care plan. The drafty room was exchanged for one, with proper insulation and temperature control. The distant staff were replaced by a care team known for their compassion, with memory patience. I even arranged for a weighted blanket, specially designed for anxiety reduction, to be delivered to her new room. None of this erased what had happened between us. The scars of my childhood remained, influencing how I approached parenthood, relationships, trust. But the active cultivation of suffering, hers and, by extension, mine, had ended. 6 months later, when Nancy's condition had stabilized with proper medication and care, Allison and I brought Ethan to meet her. The visit was brief and carefully managed, with Allison's professional expertise guiding the interaction. Nancy was on her best behavior, clearly making an effort to appear normal despite her confusion. She gave Ethan a soft toy rabbit that the facility's occupational therapy group had made, watching with genuine wonder as he examined it with serious concentration. "He has your eyes," she told me as we prepared to leave, "but not your caution. That's good." It was the closest thing to a blessing she had ever given me. On the drive home, Allison asked the question that had been hovering between us since my first visit. "Do you forgive her?" I considered this carefully, watching the mountains that had become my home landscape pass by the window. Forgiveness implies the debt is canceled. What Nancy did can't be undone or erased. I reached back to touch Ethan's foot as he dozed in his car seat. But I'm choosing to stop collecting interest on that debt. For my sake, for his sake, even for hers. The coldness that had preserved me through years of abuse and calculated revenge had served its purpose. Now, surrounded by the family I had chosen and created, I could finally allow myself to thaw completely, to experience the full warmth of a life not defined by past injuries but by present joys and future possibilities. The porch door had closed long ago, but I was the one who had kept standing outside it, shivering in remembered cold. Today, I was choosing to walk away, to build a home where all the doors opened from both sides, and no one ever had to prove they deserved warmth. Have you ever had to let go of justified anger to move forward with your life? The hardest battles are often the ones we fight within ourselves, deciding whether to hold on to righteous hurt or release it for our own peace. If my story resonated with you, please like this video, subscribe to hear more journeys of healing, and share with someone who might need to know they're not alone in their struggle. Thank you for listening, and may you find the courage to choose warmth over the cold comfort of revenge